There is an astonishing and depressing conspiracy between the mainstream media and the new socialist Labour government to cover up the truth and suppress discussion about what is really causing the streets of Britain to be so unsafe that 11 young girls are stabbed, 3 fatally, at a Taylor Swift dance class. I just can't get my head around the story of the Southport Massacre becoming completely eclipsed in just a couple of days, with the elites now obsessed with using it to launch another censorship campaign about disinformation while deploying the usual tropes about the far right. But this is really happening, and I believe it's sinister. It's an attempt to shut down a real debate about mass immigration and the failure of multiculturalism. So yesterday, Slippery Starmer held his first press conference since Monday's Southport Massacre. You'd think he'd be asked all about that, right? But no. The media, without fail, was on message, and I've got the receipts. First up, Woke ITV.
Prime Minister, Shihab Khan from ITV News. Prime Minister, how do you stop the far right from hijacking issues, especially when so many members of those groups often say they are being influenced by charismatic leaders who are often pushing for the division that you say that you want to tackle? And a second quick question, if I may. British Muslims up and down the country will have seen these riots or demonstrations, whatever you like to call them, unfold. They've seen mosques get attacked. They've watched as shops have been looted. There have been chants which some would say are grossly offensive. Partly this has happened because of misinformation. They now say they feel unsafe. What is your message to the British Muslim community, and what are you willing to do to make sure they feel safe in their own home?
Then Sly News.
Forces. You've said no to extra police powers, but what about banning some of these far right groups, as Angela Rayner has suggested?
Next, the establishment newspaper, The Times.
Aubrey from The Times.
Thank you, Prime Minister. You said that violent disorder is being whipped up online. What are you going to do to combat that spread of disinformation? Are you going to haul in social media companies? Could you restart the rapid rebuttal unit in Whitehall? And what is your message to Nigel Farage, who obviously asked this week whether the truth is being withheld? Do you think that was responsible for anything?
That was followed by the hard left Guardian.
Rowena Mason from The Guardian. Nigel Farage is the leader of Reform. He did very well, obviously, in the election, and he's been accused of spreading conspiracy theories about the Southport tragedy and his response to it. Is it enough to say that you just won't comment on what he's said, given that some people, including a former police chief, have linked his comments to the violence that broke out in the riot?
And it was rounded up with a further push for censorship by the phone-hacking Daily Mirror.
Thank you. And I've got John from the Mirror.
Hello, thank you. What consequences will there be if social media firms do fail to take action?
Thank you. And I've got John.
You can't make this stuff up. Did you notice? Not one question about why we now have a climate where our children are not safe at a Taylor Swift dance class. Not one question about the issues caused in this country by mass immigration, by a lack of assimilation, and by a failure of multiculturalism. Not one question. But as the opposition Conservatives shy away from this debate too, thank God the unofficial leader of the opposition refused to back down.
So the Prime Minister tonight reacting to what has happened over the course of the last 48 hours. His conclusion, very simple, it's all the far right, as if they're causing all of the problems. No, the far right are a reaction to fear, to discomfort, to unease that is out there shared by tens of millions of people. Let me be clear. I don't support street violence. I don't support thuggery in any way at all. But I'm worried, not just about the events in Southport, but about societal decline that is happening in our country. Law and order, folks, on our streets is breaking down. This Prime Minister hasn't got an earthly clue how to deal with it. We need to start getting tough. We need to use stop and search, regardless of the colour of the skin of anyone that gets stopped. We need tougher prison sentences for anybody carrying a knife. We need folks to get real. Because I tell you what you've seen on the streets of Hartlepool, of London, of Southport is nothing to what could happen over the course of the next few weeks. Let's have proper law and order. But Mr. Starmer, just to blame a few far-right thugs to say that's the root of our problems doesn't work.
I agree with every word. I actually think Nigel was pretty restrained there. However, the hypocrites in the be kind left, well, they become ever more deranged. I actually hate to do this because, let's be honest, these two are both such non-talented non-entities. But I wanted to play you just a little bit of this vile podcast being produced by the media giant Global. It features the hard left activist Marina Purkis and Gemma Forte parroting the most insane and abusive nonsense about Nigel.
No. Stop it. Stop validating that divisive, dangerous prick. And then he goes on social and gives like a speech, at a desk like he's some kind of world leader. Bottom feeding grifter. Your party has got what? 5 MPs. Like, bugger off. And I just stop giving him a platform, for Christ's sake.
Yeah.
Do you know the Guardian's revealed that there are at least 19 far-right rallies planned for this week?
Shit. And they're using the excuse of these poor little girls who were murdered and that disgusting incident. What are they trying to achieve? What does this solve? Let's be very clear. This is violence for violence sakes, and it achieves nothing. And I really, really hope, I think you said to me, Marina, perhaps this is where that protest bill might come in handy.
Yeah, this is where, the Public Order Act, Crime Police and whatever sentencing bill, use it. If you're going to use it against protesters and give them 5 years for planning a protest, then use it wisely here, surely. Another thing that's quite interesting is all these people who are rioting against the police. You can just guarantee that they were the ones a couple of weeks ago going that the police officer was completely justified in stamping on that person's head in Manchester Airport. You just know that, don't you?
Yeah. Oh, yes, the narratives, you can guess them all, but I am really cross at how so-called responsible news outlets are giving any prominence to him at this time, because it's actually dangerous, it's inflammatory, and it should be illegal to speak like that. It's hate speech. No.
It should be illegal. I just played you what Nigel had said, and I played you in earlier episodes this week his other intervention. It was so far from illegal hate speech. I mean, by the way, I believe in freedom of speech. No speech should be illegal. But these people are nuts. But you notice how they're also really vile and really abusive, even though they were the ones that wanted people like Lawrence Fox cancelled from GB News. Meanwhile, the narrative that idiots like that have been spewing about those arrested to cause trouble, they were saying that they were all shipped in from outside of Southport. Well, that was also completely untrue. As this post on X summed up, and it was backed up, by the way, from figures by the police, the 5 arrests in connection with the Southport riots, all locals. So much for the narrative stating the perpetrators had travelled there from afar. So once again, it has been left to one of the country's only sane leftists, Paul Embry. I've quoted him quite a lot this week, because thank God for Paul Embry, as he's revealing what's really going on. He posted some of the people who protested over the past couple of days may well have been, quote, far right. But I'm not going to automatically believe it just because liberal voices in the media or certain politicians state it. Why? Because these people also told me that Brexit was, quote, far right, that anyone who believes people can't change sex, or supports strong border controls, or criticises the Pride mania is, quote, far right, that Reform UK is, quote, far right, and so on, having utterly debased the term. They cannot expect us to believe their statements without question. They have cried wolf too often. Paul is right. I know I am convinced what the MSM and political establishment are trying to do. But I'm not giving into it. I deplore all violence, you know that. I always deplore violence. But I am also angry. And I will not shy away from a real conversation about the problems besetting this once great nation. But to react now, let me bring in today's superstar panel. And it is wonderful on a very big news day to be joined by the former Education Minister in Boris Johnson's Conservative government, Dame Andrea Jenkyns, and the ex-UKIP leader, now an outspoken media commentator, and we like that here on this show, Henry Bolton. Great to have you both here. Henry, wasn't it shocking to see that Downing Street press conference and to see where the mainstream media and Slippery Starmer want this conversation to go? They don't want to have a conversation at all about what happened in Southport. They simply want to speak about the quote-unquote far right and crack down on free speech, which is already under threat in this country.
Indeed. Look, I'm all for the government and the police and the other authorities who are all involved in dealing with public disorder, cracking down on violence and public disorder. Nobody wants to see that on our streets. But the failure in that press conference and the failure of the government so far, and indeed the police and all these other authorities involved, over not months, but years now, really, has been to acknowledge, firstly, that there is frustration and concern, and secondly, to sort of actually look in an objective manner and a sort of soul-searching manner, a self-reflective manner, at what the cause of the concern, worry, fear may be. What is motivating people, or even giving them an excuse, giving people the excuse to gather and commit public disorder in the way that we've seen? That's the missing piece here. And what we saw was Starmer totally ignoring that side of it, and just simply saying, this is, as we heard on that podcast, the left is saying it was far-right violence for the sake of violence. Now, there may be. I would be highly surprised if there weren't a number of people involved in the public disorder that we've seen in various cities who, rather like fit football hooligans back in the 80s and 90s, who just wanted to cause trouble. I have no doubt that there is a highly criminal element of pathetic people out there who have got nothing better to do than incite and be involved in violence. But, and this is the but, the majority of people in this country are seriously concerned, I believe, and worried about the rise in knife crime, the rise in sort of identity politics type related violence, the divisions in society that are being created by those people who claim to be standing up for the rights of various groups in society, the concern, the worry that's coming as a result of the tension that causes, must be acknowledged, must be addressed. And I think finally, we have got in this country, now the government and the police will deny it, a strong perception of double standards, we call it two-tier policing, but it's in policing, it's in justice, it's in politics even. People feel that some people are being treated differently. Everybody should be treated equitably by the law. The law must be enforced firmly, but fairly. And there is a perception, even if it's not the reality, and I believe it is the reality, even if it's not the reality, that perception is people's reality, must be addressed. And that is a failure of this government, and we saw it so deeply reinforced by Keir Starmer during that press conference. And remember, he's just come out of a conference with the police, a meeting with the police to try and discuss this. So clearly he's also being steered by the police.
Which, by the way, he didn't hold that sort of meeting with the police after the Hare Hill riots in Leeds, or after the riots outside Rochdale police station by local Muslims. But look, given Henry has spoken quite a lot about what Starmer said yesterday, Andrea, let me play you some of it and then I'll get you to respond off the back. So this was Keir Starmer at that press conference.
And so I call on everyone to give them, and indeed the wider community at Southport, the space to grieve, and time for the authorities in Merseyside to do their job. There will be a time for questions, and we will make sure that the victims and families in Southport are at the heart of that process. That's the very least that we owe these families. But we also owe them justice. So while there's a prosecution that must not be prejudiced, for them to receive the justice that they deserve, the time for answering those questions is not now.
So basically, don't talk about it at all, and then let's crack down on social media. Watch this.
To large social media companies and those who run them. Violent disorder, clearly whipped up online, that is also a crime. It's happening on your premises, and the law must be upheld everywhere. That is the single most important duty of government. Service rests on security, and we will take all necessary action to keep our streets safe.
Andrea, I was so disturbed by this because actually some of the right are getting on board. I saw the Sun newspaper in their editorial today endorse censorship of social media companies, and I saw your former colleague, the Conservative MP Miriam Cates, say the same thing. I can't believe, Andrea, that the solution to what happened on the streets of Southport is to try and shut us all up.
Let's face it, they should be catching real criminals who's going out murdering people rather than policing the internet like this and saying misinformation is being spread. But what really deeply concerns me, Dan, as you know, I'm a mum to 7-year-old Clifford. These children, why was the press conference not about them?
Yeah.
I mean, children are being murdered. Some are still critically injured. Why was it not about that?
There wasn't one question.
Why move the heat onto something else when young children have lost their lives? I think it's doing a dishonour, Keir Starmer, to those children and those families by taking this route, to be honest with you, Dan.
And what I find so extraordinary is the complete hypocrisy when it comes to who's to blame about this sort of thing. So after a crime like Monday, and of course I'm very transparent with our audience, I have to follow the laws of the UK. It's very difficult for us to talk about this 17-year-old who has been charged because of contempt of court laws. However, everyone immediately says, oh, no one's to blame for this. No one's to blame. It's not multiculturalism. It's not the fact that his parents came from Rwanda. No one's to blame. It's mental health. He's got autism. It's mental health. It's got to be mental health. But look at what happens when some riots that turn violent take place. It is the right's fault. So I'm going to play you another clip from those two despicable women. And I'm sorry about this, Andrea, because they do talk about you in this, but it's only fair that you are given the opportunity to respond. I mean, they've got...
Well, I'm glad you showed me it because I wouldn't listen to their podcast anyway.
No. I mean, they've got gutter mouths, but effectively, just to put some context to this, you stood up to this horrible woman, Gemma Forte, on the Jeremy Vine show yesterday, which is why she's attacking you. But she doesn't just attack you, she attacks a whole load of other right-wing figures too. So let's have a listen to this now.
I know. They're just scumbags. It's scumbags. How dare they do it in the name of these murders as well, when the poor people who live there are having to clean up after their mess. Yeah. It's beyond disgusting. It's beyond dangerous. And I'm getting quite frightened at people like it's not just Farage, it's people on X, like Darren Grimes, Lawrence Fox, Isabel Oakeshott. And Richard yesterday I was on Vine with Dame Andrea Jenkyns, thick as whale mince. And sorry, she is 100%. Yeah. And I'm sorry. Right. Anyway, the point is this came up and they didn't put it out as a clip. So good for them. And it would have gone sensational because she was sort of agreeing with Farage over this. And I was like, And I just couldn't believe this was coming out of the mouth of somebody that used to be Secretary of State for Education. But they said to me in my DMs after on Twitter, they were like, we're not putting that clip out. And I said, great, good. I'm glad you're not. That is good motivation because they don't want to stir the pot.
Andrea, only fair you have the opportunity to respond.
Well, What an unpleasant woman. I mean, I didn't like being on the panel with her. I clashed several times because, as usual, it's the sanctimonious left, Dan, who were trying to silence. And actually, I was defending Farage because actually all he said is people are rightly concerned, questions need to be answered. And then I went on to say about this two-tier policing system, and people feel that they're not being listened to. And so it's a wider society problem. Now, I'm concerned if guest panelists have that much influence to actually be able to silence another panelist. So I will look into that, Dan, because
exactly.
I'm
because
certainly not happy at that.
Well, isn't that evidence
I mean,
of what we're talking about?
To silence what I've said, which is actually in my books just common sense.
Yeah, which the vast majority of the country agree with. I mean, Henry Bolton, there's a couple of things to pick up on there, because I think, number one, Andrea is completely right. It's really chilling that Channel 5 executives made a decision to censor Andrea's comments on social media, even though they would have been very popular, and they knew they would have been very popular. And secondly, where do they get off blaming Darren Grimes and Lawrence Fox and Isabel Oakeshott and Richard Tice, when they are the people, Henry, who say, oh, well, you can't blame anyone for what happened in Southport?
I mean, I also think, sorry, Dan, but back to that press conference. I mean, remember that the press teams in Number 10, they do brief the media, don't they?
Yes.
So I think there was planted questions. So it's all part of the agenda of Keir Starmer. That's what I think.
Shocking. Yeah, really, really shocking, because my former employer, GB News, was not given a question. And I saw Mark White, their crime correspondent who was in the room, he was going to ask a question about social cohesion on the streets, and he was not given the opportunity to ask a question. Henry Bolton, you come in.
Yeah, look, as long as these people refuse, point blank, as long as they talk confidently, they behave confidently, but in reality, they are people who don't have the confidence to challenge, or to, even in self-reflection, their own worldviews. They are too cowardly to ask themselves, am I right or wrong about this? What is the reality? Am I perhaps, have I got this wrong? Have I got it partly wrong? But they won't do that. Instead of doing that, it is much more convenient, psychologically, much more convenient, much more comfortable for them to find an enemy, to challenge somebody else. They're not having to explain their position. They're not having justify why that they want to be soft on this or that or the other. They're simply passing the buck to an easy target, which is the likes of those people who stick their head above the parapet and say, this country has a problem. Because all they're saying is, no, it hasn't, apart from you.
This one's really personal, but the fellas watching, I know you're going to get it. And as I always say, ladies, buy this for your husband or boyfriend, because it is a game changer. So men, let me tell you, want grooming to be a one and done deal. And the days, thank God, of using the same trimmer for your face and your private parts are over, thanks to our friends at Manscaped. They've come up with the ultimate package to keep your hairs trimmed from 12 to 6. Introducing, and I have it right here, the Beard and Balls Bundle, featuring the Lawnmower 5.0 Ultra. Look at how beautifully packaged it is. I've actually bought these for someone because it's such a good product. And the Beard Hedger as well. But it's not the type of lawnmower that you might be thinking of, like that one. But this product provides precision trimming for all areas, even the sensitive ones, that will get you manicured as good as freshly cut grass. So I'm talking about a trimmer for the moneymaker, another for the boys downstairs, and the trimmer gets it right the first time, being gentle on the skin in all your delicate places. With 2 interchangeable skin-safe blade heads, you can choose between a precise trim or a smooth finish. And did I mention it's waterproof, so you can trim in the shower and avoid a mess everywhere. Now, the Beard Hedger is brilliant too, whether you're going for a neat stubble or a full-on lumberjack look, it has you covered, because it features a titanium-coated stainless steel T-blade and 20 length options via the Zoom wheel. Just like the lawnmower, the Beard Hedger is also waterproof, which means you can handle your beard grooming in the sink or the shower without worrying about water damage. It has 60 minutes of runtime, an LED charge indicator, and you'll never be caught mid-trim as a result. This is a gentle product too. You're not going to be cut. And actually, Mark, trust me on this, it will increase your confidence, this product. Brilliant thing is, we have such a good deal today. 20% off and free shipping. What you have to do is go to www.manscaped.com and use the code Outspoken. So when you put all of your things into your shopping bag, at the end of the experience, type in Outspoken, and my goodness, the money just comes off. It's so good. No more juggling multiple tools or dealing with subpar results. Just efficient, effective grooming wherever you need it for the premium grooming experience. Trust Manscaped. I know.
Blaming a group of people. I mean, like you said earlier, I don't agree with thugs who are, are causing criminal damage and violence, like you said as well, Dan. We're all, abhor anything like that.
But by the way, Andrea, they were not coming in. This line has kept being used. Oh, they're being shipped in. They're from far-right groups and they're being shipped in. No, they were locals. They were locals who were angry about the fact that their daughters were just stabbed on the streets.
Exactly. But don't you think as well, though, that it's the fact that by Keir Starmer and the media blaming, a group in society when these children have died, they're actually stoking up even more hatred and anger.
Yes,
absolutely.
So they're being irresponsible as a government who's just come into power.
Andrea, you said earlier that I can't remember your precise words, but the people felt that they weren't being listened to, and that creates frustration, and that in itself, has to have an outlet, and sometimes that outlet is in the form of protests and demonstrations. Sometimes they turn violent, either because people are so frustrated or because there are agitators there. It creates that. So it is absolutely crucial in all of this that the police, that the government listens and is seen to listen and is perceived to listen. What Keir Starmer did was demonstrate that he's not listening. And as a result, I'm not surprised there are more demonstrations apparently planned. So we hear. I'm not surprised about that, because people are thinking, listen, I'm sure there are people who think I will participate in a demonstration because I don't see any other way of getting our concerns across. They're not listening. So what do we do to make them listen to us? And so you have a demonstration, and then that's not listened to. So it's just going to escalate. And that's a serious problem. And all of this, the cause, the motivation, the excuse, call it what you will, for these protests that turn violent, is in large part as a result of the authorities not listening. And, Keir Starmer went, I think, a step even further. He almost disconnected that appalling, evil attack on those children from the protests. They are not disconnected. One was at least partly responsible for the other. And by disconnecting them, what he was trying to do there, I believe, is say, not only was there this incredible tragedy, this heinous crime, but these people on the far right are exploiting it. What utter and complete rubbish. And that is propaganda.
Totally.
That is
well, it
manipulation.
is, but also it's even one step further than that, Andrea Jenkyns. This is demonization.
Preston.
Because what he's saying is that we are far right because we are concerned about the impact of mass immigration. We are concerned about the failure of multiculturalism. Our Prime Minister, the bloke who said that he was going to represent all of us, is damning us to a group that he calls the far right, and also trying to take away our freedom of speech.
Completely, Dan. But can I just, before I answer that, can I give you just something hot off the press?
Please.
I've messaged the producer, Jeremy Vine, while we're on this show.
Oh, good.
And I've got a response.
What
and it seems
are they
like,
saying?
It seems like this Gemma was lying.
Not surprised.
What does it say? It says they've checked with a digital producer. All she did was ask what clips was going out after the show, and the Stockport clip wasn't one that was going to go out anyway, because they schedule only so many clips go out in the show. Please be rest assured, Gemma did not censor you. She's got no responsibility to do that. And in future, if I go on the show, they'll keep me in the loops which clips are going to go out. So it seems like this woman is lying to, again,
I'm not surprised by that.
Further her career to make her look powerful. But back to your point, Dan,
Yes.
I'm really annoyed about that, as you can see. But back to your point, look, I was very active during the Brexit years, just as you was, Henry, and I'm sure you got the same remarks against you. The amount of times, Dan, during the Brexit years, I got called far right, I got called a racist, just for wanting to leave the EU and control our borders, for God's sake. And this narrative has carried on since then. It's been used as a stick to beat common sense policies, and I'm sick of it, to be honest, Dan. And the fact is, if you look at people didn't vote for Labour in their droves, they got in by default because it was low turnout, and the Conservative Party vote was split with Reform, as we know. But some of them would have voted for them, and they're actually beating their own voters over the head with this stick, making out that they're a bunch of racist nutters.
Totally.
And it's awful. I'd be very surprised if they're in power at the next election, Dan. I mean, look, they've got a super majority now, and they're not hiding the fact that they're as left-wing as Jeremy Corbyn, are they?
Yeah, and look at the state of the country after 4 weeks. And actually, I wanted to share you this tweet from the Conservative Anthony Bootle, because I thought it summed it up so well. So he wrote, "Riots, strikes, massive spike in small boats, removal of winter fuel support for pensioners, hospital works abandoned, school teachers preparing for tax exodus chaos, free speech surrendered in British universities, £1.5 billion added to future energy bills, attempts to overturn the Cass review, diverting house building from where it's needed, pumping taxpayers' money into union pay deals, renewed support for an international organisation infiltrated by terrorists, North Sea investment evaporating, energy security surrendered, defence procurement uncertainty, businesses and investors leaving the UK, support for two-tier policing, huge tax hikes in the pipeline, enjoying the new Labour government. We're only 4 weeks in." I mean, it is extraordinary.
And it'll get worse as well, Dan, because one thing off that list, what is not on that list yet, which I can guarantee it will be, is the World Health Organization. If you remember, there was few of us MPs at the time who was trying to fight. We wanted Brexit to have control, but the WHO through the back door was trying to have more control and enforce lockdowns, etc., should they feel that it's needed. I think that'll be the next step with Labour, Dan. We're going to succeed more power to
and the EU
organisations.
And the EU. Now, two-tier policing is mentioned there. And Henry Bolton, I know you're very passionate about this, but I just want to play you one example of this and get you to react, if that's okay. So this was at one of the protests in Westminster 2 nights ago. But the person recording claims, and you can actually hear it, that the police say, "Oh, just go and pick someone out of the crowd," as if they're trying to make an example of citizens who, by all accounts, were abiding by the law. And we know Martin Daubney, the GB News presenter who was there to report on the issue, was handcuffed and nearly arrested too. So watch this clip.
They're just arresting people for no reason. I'm literally now getting really worried. So I've got a YouTube channel and I filmed everything I've done here today, and I can prove I wasn't involved in any violence at all. That I've just stood here and filmed.
I'm pretty sure I heard him say just pick anyone out.
Yeah.
So just pick anyone out, Henry Bolton. And you compare that, by the way, to how the Metropolitan Police handled the Black Lives Matter protesters, where they literally took the knee, the Just Stop Oil protesters, where they gave them food and danced with them.
And the pro-Palestinian ones, where they're allowed to project racism onto Big Ben.
Yeah, and it happened every week.
For God's sake.
Yeah.
So Henry, there is two-tier policing, isn't there?
I believe there is. Yeah, look, I'm a former police officer myself. Yeah. And, you know, we've had the Black Lives Matter people looting, running riots. We've had the pro-Palestinian people and the climbing all over monuments and so on. And now we see this. and it's dealt with in an entirely different way. Anybody can see that, and to deny that is, it's just beyond belief. That said, Dan, I'm a former police officer myself, and let's talk about that particular arrest, because there are two scenarios. First of all, that because I can't quite, my hearing's maybe not as good as it should be, but I can't quite hear a police officer say just pick anybody out. There's sort of words that might be that, but I'm not quite sure. If that was the case, as a former police officer, I can tell you now that that's an unlawful arrest, and that needs to be dealt with in the court. If I was that individual, then I would be taking that to a solicitor and saying, right, I was unlawfully arrested. Even if they were de-arrested a little bit later, that's still an unlawful arrest. The second thing is, though, and this is me, I'm sorry, but I'm going to be a little bit technical about how the police operate here, because we don't see the full context. What you have on these situations is, we didn't see it in Southport, but the Met Police have a better, a slightly better degree of training and preparedness to deal with these sort of situations. So you'll see a cordon or a line being formed. When there are those officers in that line, or the spotters who are looking for such people identify somebody who is not necessarily participating in the protest or in the demonstration or in any violence, but is maybe helping to direct it. They look as though they're a passive sort of observer, but they're not. Then an arrest team will be tasked to go through the line to make that arrest. For this reason, that if the people in that line make the arrest, then you are leaving a gap in that line whilst they're dealing with the prisoner.
Okay.
So I'm not saying that's what happened.
No.
And
you are right, by the way, also to point out context, because, of course, when it came to the Manchester airport situation, where I was one of the few people saying, no, I don't think the police have done the wrong thing here. We've got to see the full context. Everyone jumped to conclusions. So I think it is very important, and you make a very good point, that we should not judge the police based on a small action that we see on video. Thank you so much for watching Dan Wootton Outspoken. Please do subscribe if you want lots more clips and interviews like that. Plus, if you want to watch our totally uncensored after show, then visit www.outspoken.live.